It's pretty alarming to me how few people genuinely understand what makes a hamstring tight and how much bad information there is out there on the internet about this issue. Almost every single fix you see for tight hamstrings involves some form of stretching, but what if that's actually making the problem worse? Hamstring muscles are a group and they attach at the sit bone and also down around our knee. They're being represented by this band right here. Now, every muscle should have some degree of resting slack within it, so that way it has room and space to either contract or elongate. Now, the position of someone's pelvis here has a massive influence on the resting position of this muscle. Now, if I am truly in a shortened position of my hamstring, then I will have a pelvis that's tilted back like this. And that is going to be posterior rotation of the pelvis, and that would shorten my hamstring muscles. Now, the other thing you can see, and this is more common, is a pelvis that's tilted forward. And this is what we refer to as an anterior pelvic tilt. Do you see how that would take slack out of the muscle? This would actually create more tension on it. This would not make it looser, it would make it tighter. Now, we see more people that have anterior pelvic tilt relative to those that have posterior pelvic tilt, but there's an additional thing that happens when we have a significant anterior pelvic tilt. If we have more of a neutral pelvis, we usually have this straight line that goes down through our knee. But the more forward we go significantly into an anterior pelvic tilt, the more our center of mass gets pushed forward within our pelvis. And the way we counteract that is oftentimes to hyperextend the knee. And that is allowing us to keep our weight relatively back on our foot rather than just falling forward entirely. But if I have a hyperextended knee, then that is going to stretch out the lower fibers too. Now you have a muscle that's being pulled from both attachment sites away from each other, and that's creating an even bigger degree of stretch and therefore tension on that muscle. Now, if you're in this position of anterior pelvic tilt, stretching the hamstrings might give you temporary relief, but it's actually not making things better. It might be making the problem worse because the hamstring doesn't need to be longer. It actually needs to be relatively shorter, and it needs to learn how to control the tilt of the pelvis. So I'm going to show you a couple of exercises that will help you get your hamstrings to move your pelvis into more of a posterior tilt, relatively speaking, from where it was before. It needs to work with the foot and the heels to accomplish that. Just as a quick visualization, and you can try this yourself, if I have more of a neutral pelvis, then lifting my leg up with a straight leg isn't that hard. But if I were to extend my back and stretch out my hamstring, now when I do it, it feels really limited and terrible. So if you have a limited straight leg raise, this is what you're experiencing in all likelihood. This is why I can take someone and turn their hamstring on and actually create more tension in it that way, and you can see an improvement in someone's straight leg raise. What we're gonna do is get our feet on the wall. And ideally for most people, they're gonna have a shelf underneath them of some sort. So you could use something like this DC block, you could use a bench, you could use whatever you need to stack up, as long as you can still maintain your whole foot flat on the wall. That's gonna be the important part there, because we need foot contacts on the wall. Those foot contacts are the inner heel and the first metatarsal head on both sides evenly. That doesn't mean we lose the outside foot, that just means that's where our bias is. Now, we're also gonna have an object in between our knees. And this object needs to be a little bit compressible, so that way when we squeeze it, our knees very slightly move in. But we also don't want the object to be so large that in the starting position, our knees are outside of our hips, so they're wide like that. It should be, we're starting pretty in line with our feet and our hips. And now what we're gonna do, keeping our hands on our low ribs and our chin directly at the ceiling, we're going to do a little posterior pelvic tilt. And we're gonna do that by dragging our feet down into that shelf or down on that wall, but they're not obviously going to move. It's the intention of dragging our heels down, which is going to lift our tailbone off of the floor. And as we do that, we're going to feel our hamstrings engage on both sides relatively evenly. Our low back remains flat, so that's all we're feeling right now is hamstrings. After you have that, you're going to squeeze the ball. And for this, you're gonna squeeze it a decent bit. On a scale of 1 to 10, you're looking at about somewhere between a 5 to 7 out of 10. Not to the point where you're shaking or you're sweating, just enough to kind of feel your inner thigh muscles working on both sides. So make sure you don't lose your hamstrings when you get that squeeze. And then you're just going to inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, softly sigh all the air out. You're going to be very tempted to tense other things up in your body as you do this, such as your neck, such as your calves, such as your abs, but you want to make sure that nothing is engaging other than your hamstrings and your inner thigh muscles. The only exception to that could be a little bit of your side abs at the end of the exhale. As a last resort, if you don't have a wall and a shelf you can put up against that wall, you could just put your feet on a bench or a chair, something stable, and drag down into that. It's not the most ideal thing ever, but it will certainly be better than nothing. Just make sure when you are doing this, it's just pretty much your heels digging down, maybe a little bit of your shin. You don't want the bench so close to where you're here. It's gonna make it harder for you to find your hamstrings and tuck genuinely. This type of approach and implementing it to help resolve common movement and postural issues is a key component of my beginner body restoration program. If you want a program that anyone can do is progressed over phases of weeks to help you get upright and feeling and moving really well, then check it out. It's linked down below in the description. Setup for this, we're in this A-frame position with our feet flat on the ground, the whole foot flat on both sides. And we have a ball that allows our knees to stay in line with our toes and our hips. It's not too wide, shoving our knees out, not too narrow, getting our knees to cave in. It should be keeping it in line with both the hips and the knees. And then what we're gonna do is just place our hands on our low ribs and maintaining the whole foot flat, we're gonna focus on keeping the weight in the heels. So we don't want the toes to come up as a result of that. Keep the whole foot flat, but think about trying to drag your heels towards your butt. They won't move, but the intention will get your pelvis to slightly lift off of the floor. So your low back stays flat, but your tailbone is slightly off of the floor, and you should feel your hamstrings on both sides engage. And you're gonna hold that position as you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, get all the air out until you feel a little bit of side ab engagement, and then pause, close your mouth, tongue on the roof of your mouth, inhale through the nose, and you're gonna feel your rib cage expand, keeping a little bit of that side ab tension when you inhale. If you're having a hard time finding your hamstrings, what you can do is place a couple of dumbbells in between your heels and your hips, and that'll allow you to drag back into some external object so you can find those hamstrings a little bit better. Another adjustment we may have you do is get a little bit more elevation so that we can put you in more of a passive posterior tilt of your pelvis. We want to make sure the whole foot is flat on both sides and you're still focused on feeling those heels. I'd recommend doing these exercises for about 2 sets of 5 to 10 very slow breath cycles, emphasizing the breath over time because the breath is going to help improve your diaphragmatic breathing and positioning, and that is also going to help you maintain a better neutral pelvis. Because if your diaphragm can work and your rib cage isn't flared like this, then you won't be in as much of an anterior pelvic tilt. But if you are in an anterior pelvic tilt, then we need to learn how to stack things better, and good diaphragmatic breathing helps accomplish that.